Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Autism Confidential, the podcast from the National Council on Severe Autism. I'm Jill Escher. I'm your host today, and I am the president of NCSA. As you know, this month, our podcasts are highlighting issues around safety, emergency preparedness, and first responders, all in honor of our dear and departed former Vice President Feda Al-Malidi and her son Mu, who both died on September 26, 2020 in a tragic house fire, a day we will never forget. Mm-hmm. The September 26th project honors their memory by bringing information and mostly reminders to people about emergency preparedness so that we don't see disasters like that or others. And today we're really very, very lucky to have actually someone who was a friend of Feda's and who is also extremely active in the autism community on issues around wandering and elopement. Kate Movius, welcome.
Thank you, Jill. I'm happy to be here.
Kate is in my former homeland of Los Angeles, where she is, I don't know what your title is. What's your title for LA Found?
Title, CEO, CFO. I'm the founder of Autism Interaction Solutions. It's one of the things that I do, and that's the organization through which I train mostly law enforcement.
That's excellent. So before we go into Kate's incredible work relating to community safety, let's learn a bit about Kate, because Kate is a very interesting person.
It's all downhill from here.
Yes, the lovely, the beautiful, the actress, the writer, the singer, the whatever. So Kate, tell us about your journey into autism. How did you come to this land called autism?
Well, how did I come to it? I came to it through my beautiful son, Aidan, who's now 22, and he was diagnosed in 2003. He had his first contact with LAPD, with law enforcement, when he was 3, and he had many contacts after that. So that's what led me to work with law enforcement.
And when you say contacts, what were those contacts?
So it was all for elopement, all for going missing, sprinting. It's often referred to, yes, as wandering, but that's a misnomer, I think, for many of our loved ones, because our loved ones tend to sprint. And I would call 911 and they would come out, and we would inevitably find him once he had gone through an unlocked door at a neighbor's house. His most critical incident occurred in, I've blanked out the year. It was so traumatic. It was 2014. And he got out through a locked door. Our house at that point was like Fort Knox. The great irony of that critical missing incident is that at the time I was lecturing regional centers, which in California are local nonprofits that support people with developmental disabilities. I was lecturing regional centers on how to prevent elopement and wandering in the autism population. And then my son, I can laugh about it now. And then my son goes and has a critical missing incident where he removed his clothing because, felt good, and went missing we live in a very urban area of Los Angeles, Northeast LA. He was found 2.5 miles away 3 hours later. And he was at a major intersection, and he had gone missing in the middle of the night. He was transported to a local hospital as a John Doe. And my phone call had crisscrossed with theirs. So when I called 911 and I described him to the dispatcher, and I want to talk about this in a moment, by the way, because in the moment when your child has gone missing, you're quite elevated, escalated, hysterical, right?
Absolutely.
It's very hard to remember what your child was wearing. What are the most useful pieces of information to know? So I want to talk about that in a moment. But the thing that the dispatcher said to me that will haunt me forever is, she said, well, that does match the description of a juvenile that was picked up, he was transported to a hospital, and I can't tell you any more information. I said, well, was he wounded? Was he alive? She said, well, I can't share that with you. So for 20 minutes, I didn't know.
Mm. Oh my God.
And understandably, they had opened up a case with the DCFS because this was a naked juvenile found.
And for
Um,
those who don't know, if you don't mind defining DCFS.
the Department of Child and Family Services. So,
Mhm.
you see a missing child. He looked very young for 14. Wasn't a big guy. So they had to investigate me, of course, and find out what was going on. So it just triggered, it was this domino effect of this whole series of hoops that had to be jumped through. Um, Happy ending, he was
Mhm.
unharmed. I was allowed to be with him. They understood, because due to the severity of his autism, I think in that situation it helped him, because the first responders who came in, neither of them, by the way, had ever met anybody with autism, but because Aidan's pretty much nonverbal, and had a lot of sort of jumpy behaviors, they knew something, as they said, something was up,
Mhm.
something was different.
Subtle, very, yeah.
Something was up with that
Mhm.
kid. But it was terrifying. It was one of the worst days of my life, obviously,
Mhm.
again, with a happy ending. Um, I point out, the fact that I was lecturer and all that stuff, not just to be sort of funny, ironic, but to basically illustrate this can happen to anybody.
Mhm.
Elopement and wandering are extremely risky for our loved ones with autism, obviously, but we
Yeah.
can prepare and prepare and prepare, and these things can still happen. Most families receiving a diagnosis of autism don't get any education on wandering and elopement. And one of the issues that's near and dear to my heart is, how can we capture, so to speak, these children who are diagnosed early and help their families? Because a lot of wandering prevention has to do with community outreach, things like swim lessons, and also just, again, putting on that family's radar, what are the important preventative issues?
Mhm. Well, I want to dig into that a little bit, right? Because ultimately, we want our podcast series to be instructive for people, offer helpful, useful, pragmatic advice to people. But I do want to ask a little bit more, about your background, because you are an interesting person. So let's talk a little bit about you were in LA, you were in the business, right? You were an actress. Um, you had two sons, one of whom had autism, um, and then your life changed. Can you tell us a little bit about your life and then how you came to really devote yourself to this issue of
Sure.
all the many things,
Yeah.
yeah, in your world?
Well, yes, acting brought me to Los Angeles. I was primarily a voiceover actress doing Nickelodeon cartoons and occasionally doing other stuff, a lot of live comedy. I used to do Saturday nights at the Comedy Store on Sunset
Oh,
Boulevard, for those who are in Los Angeles.
you were a stand-up comic?
I was a sketch comedian. So
Oh,
we had a sketch group, and it was a lot of fun. And yeah, I would go out on auditions, for they would tell me to show up in a bikini, stuff like that. I was not really built for that, so to speak. I had a hard time getting through those auditions with a straight face. um and then Aidan was born, and I continued. The great thing about voiceover work is you can do it. You could roll in with your, baby and nursing your baby and still do it, right?
Hmm.
Um, but he was diagnosed as I said, in 2003, and the type of autism that Aidan had was all consuming. I don't mean to say that autism isn't always all consuming, right?
Hmm.
He never ever slept. He didn't really sleep until he was about 15.
Hmm.
So from the time he was born, he was up every 90 minutes, sometimes more, sometimes up for 2 or 3 days at a time. So sleep deprivation was kind of my life.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
that is all consuming.
it's all
I've been
consuming.
there. Yeah,
It's all consuming. Yeah. I think many of our listeners probably have
they can relate.
been there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I decided to, because I wanted to do something, I wanted to work, I decided to help women who were in labor, or I wasn't a doula, but I was assisting women in teaching them how to try to minimize intervention.
Hmm.
So I was giving birth classes, and I loved doing that. And I could sort of show up and have a little, 3-hour window where I was working with all these couples who were scared or who were nervous, and I could kind of leave my own fear and my nervousness at home. So I did that in Hollywood for a while, and I really enjoyed that work a lot. Um, Aidan was very complex, in the word of one therapist who worked with him early on. Is the most complex child I've ever worked with. Um, I used to get comments like, well, we don't know what to do for him and nothing's working. He was at a school for children with autism, and I remember one of the administrators saying, well, he's the most autistic child in the class.
Yeah, I got the same
Thank
thing
you.
with
That's
my
helpful.
son too. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And that's really
two
helpful.
brothers.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That helps me as the mother. Let me just take that comment and go, think about it for the next
Mhm.
8 years. Um, so he started life in a very different place from where he is now. His set point now is happy. He is just a happy guy. And he's grown into a lot of things. He's severely autistic.
Mhm.
Definitely. He's fully conserved. He needs supervision all the time. But he's discovered painting, he's discovered music, and he's able to do things on his own like that, where he's got his own agency. So that for me is, it's like my work here is done. I feel like because he has things that he can do that he wants to do,
Mhm.
that's amazing.
That is amazing.
And he's
That is absolutely amazing. I mean, I have a son who doesn't have that, right? And
right.
so every day of his life is filled with ennui,
Sure.
right? And that boredom, I think, leads him to his destructive behaviors. He's
Of
not a
course.
bad kid.
Of
He's a
course.
really real sweetheart, but he needs something to do,
Hmm.
right?
We
And
all do. Yeah.
yeah, we all do. I mean, no one wants to stare at a wall. So, a lot of that energy that my son has gets channeled
Sure.
into not very productive places. I can talk about the destroyed furniture, et
Hmm.
cetera. But yeah, so I completely understand what you mean. Like, oh my gosh, I see him on Facebook. I watch him painting or sitting at his little keyboard, and like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can tell his brain is working when he's doing that. And yeah, that's a huge change. Okay,
It took a
so
long time. It took a
yeah,
long time.
well, good mommy, and you've been through a lot, and I hope he's sleeping now at least.
He is, yeah, I never want to say that aloud without knocking every piece of wood that is nearby,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Well, we have medically assisted sleep in
sure,
our house, so
sure.
whatever works, whatever works.
Whatever works.
Yeah. Okay, so you went through all this trauma, and believe me, I had similar trauma with my son, although not as bad as what you experienced. But I had, the police called out, to try to find Johnny in the neighborhood after elopement. And I've been there and through that incredible panic where every
Yeah.
second feels like 5 hours.
It does. It does.
It's
It
just
sort of feels
horrible.
like one of those like scenes from a horror movie where everything is slowing down and you hear like evil carnival music and everything's tilting, At least that's where I go.
The thoughts that go through your head.
I
It's
know.
just the thoughts that go, every
Yeah.
terrible narrative goes through
Yeah.
your head and
The
you can't
white
stop
van.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. The dead, I thought Johnny would be hit by a car. I mean, that was
Hmm.
my thing
Of
because
course.
Johnny,
Yeah.
and to this day, he'll run across the street without looking, without any awareness of a car. So that I continue to think that will be my son's demise.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I spent many, many times in my life in that mode. So, um, what about what should parents know? A kid gets diagnosed with autism. We know there are incredibly high rates of elopement. I've heard up to 50% of all
Hmm.
kids with autism elope. Uh, what do you want them to know?
I want them to post on the fridge, and maybe that's very old school, or in their phones, a list of things to say to a 911 dispatcher. Because again, until or unless you are in this position of having to call 911, you're not, why would you know what to say, right? Other than, my God, my child has gone missing, my child's gone missing, with that
Mhm.
terror in your heart,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
So it's really easy if you can have it all written down. Another thing,
And what should be
and
written down? What
right,
are
well,
those
yeah,
things?
let me tell you what you want to say. You need a physical description. Ideally, remember what they're wearing. But again, many of us are sleep deprived. Do we actually remember what they're wearing? One way to remedy that is just to take pictures during, throughout the day with your child. Take a picture at night of the PJs, what
Hmm.
the pajamas were. Um, you want to state the diagnosis right off the bat. That's extremely important. You want, let's say it's my 22-year-old who goes missing. A 22-year-old without autism going missing is completely different from a severely autistic 22-year-old going missing. So if you
Hmm.
want to tell the dispatcher, this my son is nonverbal and is severely autistic and might exhibit behaviors that are alarming or confusing and might not be able to comply
Hmm.
due to his diagnosis. So they really want details like that. The other thing that you can write down for yourself, because again, panic can wipe out our brains. What are places that your child might want to go? Where does your child like to go? Does your child like the neighbor's dog? Does your child like the neighbor's pool? Does your child love McDonald's down the street? And write down every place that they like. You can even write down things that are not very close by. If there's a park that you drive your child to, if there's a grandparent you drive your child to. So having all of that written down. Now, let's say your child isn't found right away and they have to start going up in the air. They have to use a chopper, they have to use more extensive search techniques. You want to be able to guide first responders on what might help draw your child out. So this is just in the event that, let's say, they're on a megaphone, they're in the air. Would it be music? Would it be the sound of their mother's voice? Would it be the offer of, hey, Aidan, you can have chicken nuggets. We've got chicken nuggets waiting for you. And conversely, you want to talk about the things that would keep your child in hiding. And that can often be a helicopter, right?
Right.
Or a dog.
Hmm.
So having these things, now that's sort of a more refined list to start writing out for yourselves of this, should this happen, I need to have my ducks in a row. I need to be able to tell first responders, here's what will help draw him or her out, and here's what may keep him or her in hiding. Here are preferred places to go. But foundationally, one of the most important pieces of safety for children and adults who elope is swimming. Drowning is the leading cause of death by, it's 91% of those who die when they wander die because they've drowned.
Hmm.
In Southern California, we're lucky that we don't have freezing cold, but we have a lot of pools, we have a lot of ocean. And throughout the country, we were talking about this, there are tragedies every month that
Yeah.
have to do with elopement and wandering. So drowning is by far the leading cause of death, and then we have traffic deaths. And then we have minuscule percentages of the really scary stuff we think about, like strangers and things like that. But swimming. So how do we teach our autistic children to swim? Here in California, we had special therapeutic swim lessons that were paid for by the state. Obviously, that is not provided everywhere, but I would recommend to parents that they really try to figure that piece out. Even if they live nowhere near water, there's your child is still probably going to be drawn to water. Just statistically, our kids really do love it, right? They like the way it looks. They may like the way it feels, the way it sounds.
Mhm.
And again, this is something that's usually not on our radar until it's happening, right?
Right.
So swim lessons are very, very important. We're extremely lucky now that we have Google Maps, Google Earth. So should a child go missing, you can take a look right away. Where are the bodies of water nearby? And I always, when I'm training my cops, I always tell them, go to Google Earth, look at all the bodies of water nearby if you have a critical missing incident.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I read these stories, as you said, like every week there's some new tragedy, sometimes multiple,
Yeah,
in a week. It's unbelievable. And it's every kind of water, it's a retention pond, it's a little creek, it's a pool,
yeah,
it's like a temporary pond. It's all kinds of bodies of water. It kind of doesn't matter what it is. Um,
that's right.
so-
Because I think again, there's this universal appeal, like that our loved ones with autism really do love water,
mhm.
and so we have to keep that in mind as parents and caregivers, um, all the time, and revisit that and continually. And by the way, revisit all of these pieces of safety, like revisit, okay, what should I do if I have to call 911?
Mhm.
um, and revisit, what is my child wearing at this time? Where are the places that he or she has really liked going recently? Keep trying to, I know that, as autism parents, we are juggling so many things, but this is kind of an important maintenance piece to keep in place. Now, the other part of safety for elopers or potential elopers is your home, right?
Yeah,
Trying to,
you mentioned that your house was like Fort Knox, right?
I
When
did.
Aidan eloped.
He
That
figured out how to open a deadbolt, which he hadn't yet known how to do. So he
Oh,
had a new
yeah.
skill that he developed.
Hmm.
He
Right.
developed a new skill.
Surprise.
You can have things like door alarms, window alarms. If your child responds to pecks and responds to reading, you can have stop signs placed. You want to also have these issues taught through school. You want to have it written into your IEP, because kids go missing from schools as well.
Hmm.
So
And
if
also ABA programs are now more
also home
attentive
program. That's right. So
to safety.
you want to attack it from those two places: is school and then your at-home program, um, and really help your child to develop whatever skills they can. And also, it helps you. It's sort of like keeping children safe with autism is a real community effort. It's a group effort. And the challenge is that autism is such a potentially or fundamentally isolating experience. We have to try to include our communities when we have a runner, which
Hmm.
when we have a child that goes missing.
Hmm. I
All of my
remember when my son was younger, I created a letter to all my neighbors saying like,
Yep.
hey, this is what's up. If you see him, call this number, here's the description. Um, and yeah, a lot of my neighbors got to know
That's
Johnny
great.
because he did wander. My daughter did too, but to a lesser degree.
Right.
Um, and I think that helped.
It helps a
They know.
lot. And
Yeah.
and I know a lot of people might not know their neighbors, or their neighbors might be complaining about their child, but it's
Mhm.
really important to try to reach out. And if you're comfortable, do exactly what you said. Write a letter, have a photo of your child if you're comfortable with that. Um, there are like forms like this, which you can't really see it, but
We can see it.
um, National Autism Association has great resources on
They
its.
do. I'm going to be interviewing them for the next podcast.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I think they're among the best, and they have downloadable resources, so you don't have to start from square one,
Right.
where it shows exactly what's helpful to fill out. A letter that you can give to your local law enforcement, a letter for school, a letter for the neighbors. It's all
Mm,
about that reaching out piece. And
mhm,
sometimes, again, we have to overcome our own desire to sort of isolate, right?
right.
And really, really reach out, because it's getting community assistance with serial elopers is really, really important.
So when you do your trainings, you're training law enforcement
Hmm.
specifically about wandering or about other issues as well?
The main crux of the training is de-escalation and communication with
And
autistic
what do
people.
you teach them that they didn't already know? I'm curious.
Well, I teach them what autism might look like, sound like. Um, Many of them really don't know because autism is invisible, right? So there are no facial features that indicate a developmental disability.
Mhm.
There's no wheelchair.
I'm
Um,
curious, in your experience, have these first responders already had some autism training, or are
very
you the
little,
first? Oh, really?
almost none. It gets
Wow.
it gets
Okay.
grouped in. It gets grouped in for about 15 to 20 minutes, maybe, with mental health disorders. So
Wow.
they're
Okay.
taught for a few minutes about schizophrenia, and then they're taught for a few minutes about autism, and this is during an 8-hour day. And
Mm,
they come in, and I've been doing this now for 13 years. They come in and they say, I didn't know any of this. I didn't know any of
really?
this.
God, I'm so ignorant. I would have thought that by now they would have had at least basic training about autism.
No,
But yeah,
it's
I
usually
mean,
not standalone.
yeah.
But the
Mm,
best part of the training, I think the most effective part of the training, is I have autistic co-trainers
mm-hmm.
so that they can actually, because I can talk to them, and I run them through a whole bunch of exercises where they can feel sensorily like really uncomfortable, the police officers, so that
Oh,
they start to have an understanding of what it might feel like to be overloaded and have somebody trying to ask you questions. What's your name?
right.
Where do you live? What are you doing? Where have you
Yeah.
been? Where are you going?
Hmm.
But when I bring in the autistic co-trainers, then it's pretty much from, it's a wide range of autism that
You bring in Aiden?
I don't bring in Aidan, because
Mm.
then I can't focus, because Aidan would be running all over the room like
Oh,
Chinko.
okay.
But
Hmm.
yes, I have brought Aidan in.
Hmm.
Um, but I have long-term coworkers that I've worked with, who range from, cracking jokes at the podium to very severely affected by autism.
Hmm.
And so that they can see, because a lot of people, as we all know, a lot of people think of autism as, Rain Man or the good doctor, or,
Hmm.
somebody who's sort of quirky and has is amazing at art or piano or math, right? That's what we
Right.
see. That's what we see portrayed.
Right.
Um, and what I explain to them is that is minuscule percentage wise, right?
Right. Yeah. So you
Um,
bring reality,
I
right,
bring
to
reality,
the
and
training.
really the main takeaway, and I tell this to the deputies and the officers, is I want you to slow down. Slow down when you're
Hmm.
rolling up on this situation, because
Hmm.
if you speed up, which is human to want to do, it's instinctive to try to speed things up. You ask somebody their name, they don't answer you. Ask them again. Ask them again. You're just going to escalate. So
Right.
slow down and then wait for a response, and then try to give alternative forms of communication. And we put together, the mayor of industry and I put together sensory kits for patrol, so that deputies can carry these around. And, it has a whiteboard in it, and it has, a Chewy if somebody needs that. It has headphones, noise canceling, things like that, a lot of fidgets. Um, it's something, right?
Wow.
It's something.
Hmm.
So just trying to give law enforcement options,
Hmm.
trying to give them, easy options,
Hmm.
and hopefully they can use that and not use force.
Well, it's super important because a lot of parents are legitimately afraid of
Of
what would
course.
happen. And, I have a very strong, manly, handsome son who has no exterior, facial or physical signs of being disabled, but is of course profoundly disabled.
Sure.
And if a police officer, if he were to run across the street or into someone's yard, which he has done on multiple occasions,
Hmm.
and if an officer were to say stop, Johnny wouldn't stop. So then what? Then it escalates. So yeah, and the other thing that I've done, Kate, I don't know what you think about this, is I've contacted our police department with information about my son, his address, the basic, just
Really
to make sure
important.
that there's something in the records about him so that if there's a call, it might pop up. I
Yep.
don't, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's absolutely essential, I think. There are some programs. The sheriff's department here has a program which is called Special Alert, where you can voluntarily type in your information and they will then flag your house as having somebody with a disability there. But yes, going down to your local police station is a very important thing to do. And again, bring a photo. If you can bring your kid, but as we all know, that might be impossible. And just introduce yourself and keep at it. If you feel like the person's like, okay, thank you so much, and puts it to the side, say, who's your lead right now on staff? I'd really love to discuss this with them. And we've had multiple elopement incidents, and really, really love to sit down and kind of get this in front of somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is crucial.
It's become so common by now. I mean, you would think that every police department in the land would have some understanding of how prevalent this problem is, and how serious this problem is. You would hope that none of them would be surprised by a call like, my son has severe autism and is prone to
Right.
wander, I mean, or
Well,
elope.
when I
You
started
would
this,
think.
yeah, yeah. And when I started this 13 years ago, I always ask at the top of the training, who in here has ever met somebody with autism, or who in here knows somebody with autism? And I used to get maybe one hand.
Mm-hmm.
And now it is at least 2/3 of the room.
Mm-hmm. Well, the prevalence of autism has increased. You're right, and the visibility and the prevalence have both increased.
True. I think what I do detect is that they do have more awareness than they
Yeah.
used to.
Mm-hmm. Well, where can people find out more about what you do? I'm sure that people are listening to this thinking like, I'd like to do trainings like Kate does, you know.
Sure.
Where can they go?
Well, there's a website that I have, Autism Interaction Solutions.com. It's a mouthful. I am happy to discuss this with anybody offline who wishes to contact me, and you can reach me there. I think that a lot of this has to do with just introducing yourself to your local PD. Obviously, here in LA, we have 18,000 personnel in the sheriff's department. So this all came to me in a different way because we have such a large police department. But if you have a smaller police department, just introduce yourself and go in and say, look, I'm a parent, somebody with autism. I'd be interested in providing some training. You can always contact me. I've flown out of state to do trainings. I generally stay in state, but that's a possibility as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a number of outfits around the country that do trainings now, and they all seem to be a little bit different. They all focus on you know different topics, but definitely wandering is a huge, huge, huge one of them. Huge one.
It
I
is.
say
And
wandering. I know I shouldn't say wandering because they really aren't wandering. I just
printing.
said they're sprinting.
I
They're
wanted to talk
eloping with
about
no sense of safety
no
awareness.
sense of safety at
Mhm,
all. And
right.
I wanted to mention LA Found.
Yes, please.
Um, I know we're sort of nearing the end here,
Yes.
but the other piece of work that I've done is on this task force, and it's specifically wandering. And we provide.
And that's for both autism and conditions like Alzheimer's,
It
right?
is. It
Yeah.
is. It was actually founded by a man who had a tragic loss with his wife who wandered away in
Mhm.
Los Angeles. But we provide wristbands, Project Lifesaver wristbands, which is a wearable tracking technology. It's, of course, a voluntary program. And we initially brought it to Glendale, California, and then it went countywide. Um, so you sign up your loved one and they receive a wristband, and that's in conjunction, you work with the sheriff's department, which oversees all of LA County. So should your loved one go missing, you have a whole protocol where you can call that in and they can track. It has
Because it's GPS.
It's not GPS, it's old-fashioned radar. Because GPS, they tested everything out, and they found that with the topography in big urban center, that they often lost signal. So LA Found is a really good resource for those of us who are here in Los Angeles and in LA County in general.
Okay, very good. So in closing, any memories of Feta?
Oh gosh. I just still can't believe she's gone,
Yeah.
because I can hear her and see her feeding each other sushi. We went to this sushi restaurant, and she started like messing with the decor immediately. Like there were these statues, and she just picked one up and started cradling it and making me laugh so hard. She just was interacting with the environment immediately and being so hilarious and bawdy, and there are so many memories.
Yeah. Never a boring moment with Feta. Oh my gosh.
Never a boring moment, never an unhilarious moment.
Yeah.
I
agree. It is an unbelievable, senseless loss. And I think that's what spurs us to, prevent anything like this from happening again. We just still can't believe it.
No, I feel the same way. It's illogical.
Yeah.
But I hear her and I see her. I mean, that's the thing, is she's very much alive.
And as I say, living rent-free in our heads forever.
Living rent-free in our heads. That's right. Forever. That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kate.
You're so welcome.
This is very, very useful, and hopefully people will think about. Can I ask you one more question? I'm sorry. There are always like a million questions I want to ask, even though I'm going over time. We mentioned the importance of swim lessons. A lot of parents have a hard time accessing swim lessons.
Sure.
Right. Any tips, for that?
Well, we have our local Ys, right? I think most places have a Y, a YMCA. I think that's a really good place to start. I think that whatever your developmental disability services system is in your state, is to check with them about this issue and even advocate about this issue with all of your extra time and energy.
And I think you mentioned before we spoke today that in California, right, you can get swim lessons, right, as part of your plan, right, through the regional centers, if you advocate for it.
It's kind of been going in and out funding wise, right? So when Aidan was little, this was a long time ago, we got it. And then it went out as the money went away from California. And I think it's back.
Okay.
But what I would love to be able to do in this state is to make this mandatory.
I agree.
The education, at least every person receiving a diagnosis of autism gets information on wandering and elopement. But I think we should go a step further. Every person who gets a diagnosis of developmental disability and autism also receives swim lessons.
I completely agree. I think it's a really overlooked, important area.
Extremely important.
Yeah. And something maybe we can advocate for in the States. Okay. All right. I won't ask any more questions. I'm sorry.
I don't mind.
Kate Movius, thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
On Autism Confidential. Thanks for tuning in to Autism Confidential. If you'd like to learn more, share an idea for an episode, or become a sponsor, please visit us at autismconfidential.org. The views expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual speakers. Content presented is for informational purposes only, and we do not provide any medical or legal advice.